I think we're live. Hello, everyone. Just want to do a couple of technical checks. If you are able to view and hear me, it would be great to get your feedback in the Q&A chat box. Otherwise, I'm just going to do a couple of technical checks before we get started. All right. Hello, everyone. Great. Just doing some last minute technical checks, but it looks like our Hangout is up and working. I'd like to welcome you to the Coursera 101 virtual workshop. This is the first workshop that we are hosting virtually, which is very exciting. It also suggests that there might be some technical issues we may experience along the way, but we'll do our best to address those as needed. One goal of this workshop is to interact with you in your content. So we encourage you throughout today's presentation to post any questions in the Q&A box of the Google Hangout. To post a question in the Google Hangout, I'm going to actually do a screen share so that you can see this on my end. You need to have a G+ account. But to post a question, put your mouse on the left side of the screen and there will be a Q&A box that will pop up. And you can present or post your questions in the right-hand box if you're signed in. However, if you don't have a G+ account and don't want to sign up for one and want to ask a question, feel free to send an email to the initial workshop RSVP email account and just hit reply and send a question there. Great. That being said, we'd like to welcome you to the virtual workshop today. And I'm actually going to switch gears to present my slides, and then we will discuss any questions or concerns that you have when developing your content. The overall goal of our session today is to, I'll present some core pedagogical best practices to you, and then we'll jump into the Q&A session and adding content or talking about your content and some of the questions and concerns that you have during the development process. Again, feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A session. All right, I'm going to screen share. And all right, so I'd like to formally introduce myself. My name is Kara Benke. I'm a teaching and learning specialist here at Coursera. I specialize in data and technology courses, but at Coursera we also have our hands in many types of content as well. So I also conduct research at Coursera. So if you're ever interested in research, I'd be happy to collaborate with you on those efforts. So our goals for today are to cover 3 topics about developing content on Coursera. First, we're going to explore this idea of learners and what the story of a learner is. And this is a very important foundational pedagogical best practice because this really crafts and designs your entire course and who you're designing for. Next, we're going to discuss how to take our learner stories and think about the actual outcomes that learners are going to have after the end of your course or specialization. And then finally, we're going to discuss how to turn these learning outcomes into active learning through projects and through distributed capstones throughout the specialization. First, I want to do a high-level introduction of where we are today. So Coursera has changed so much since 2012 when we first founded the company. We now have over 20 million learners. We have over 1,800 courses, and we've partnered with universities and enterprise institutions from all around the world, which is really exciting. Our catalog, I think, is the most extensive catalog in the MOOC space, and really our best asset is our academic partners who are the experts in their field and their domain and bringing this content to learners around the world. So the mission of Coursera is that we really believe that we can create transformative learning experiences for people around the world. We live in a globalized Web 2.0 world where really there's disruptive innovation happening everywhere in our lives. And what better way to use that technology to enable and to help empower people and to transform their lives and help meet the goals that they want to achieve. So this is our focus for Coursera, and we're on our way to impacting people around the world because we have learners from almost every continent, and in fact, 40% of all of our active learners are coming from emerging economies. So this is a really exciting time to be developing content on Coursera because you truly have the means to impact people from all around the world. In fact, almost 20% of all of our learners learn on Coursera through mobile technologies. So this is really an exciting opportunity to disrupt the way in which we learn, but also to complement the academic system and content in a way that is truly transformative. I want to mention that the learners who are engaging in your content are very different than a traditional on-campus experience. Although we do have many learners who are college students, we also have many learners that come from a diverse background. They have a very broad range of age and educational background, and most of our learners on Coursera are actually employed full-time. So this really changes the perspective on how we think about content, how we develop content, because effectively we have to develop content that is intended for people who live very busy lives. So if people are working full-time, then really they're volunteer learners. So how can we engage learners in a way that is meaningful, that meets their particular goals, as well as can inform their practice or what skills they're looking to develop in a meaningful way? So last year, in 2015, Coursera partnered with the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Washington to conduct a study to see what type of learners are on Coursera and what they're looking for and what they're trying to gain from interacting on the platform. Now, there are two main categories where learners are focusing their efforts or their goals. 52% of these learners who participated in the survey mentioned that their career was their key motivation on why they were looking at Coursera. 28% had an academic advancement. In other words, they were taking some courses that would help them improve or succeed in their current academic standings. But really, these learners are looking for ways to enhance their careers and their fundamental skill sets. So this is something that we need to keep in mind when you're developing content for the Coursera platform. And here's some more statistics about what these type of learners in these surveys were reporting. And it's actually really exciting and inspiring in a lot of ways. Some of these learners reported that they actually received a raise or a promotion after taking a course, or that they were able to change careers and actually find a new job. We also have seen other learners who are in a more traditional academic setting improve their college admissions, as well as just gaining the knowledge they need to succeed in a field, whether it's an on-campus experience or a blended experience. So, and effectively, our learners are looking for tangible benefits, whether it's for their career or a for-credit educational benefit. But it's not just college students and full-time employees that are on Coursera. But actually, there are many people within companies that are learning Coursera, or learning courses, learning content on Coursera. We did a data poll of just the type of email addresses of our learners and whether they were coming from corporate enrollments. And we have tens of thousands of learners that are coming from their corporate, or they're using their corporate account on Coursera. So this really reinforces the fact that people are coming to the content, they're coming to your courses because they need to further pursue their career goals, whatever those might be. So when we're thinking about our learners, we need to think about what are their aspirations. So far, we've seen that learners really care about these credentials, and a valuable credential could be a certificate on completion of a course, which you can post on LinkedIn. It's also the hard skills or soft skills that they've gained from a course itself, whether it's in machine learning or business management, etc. And it's also, our learners are looking for ways to further their portfolios or their educational background, whatever it might be. But it's also industry partners are looking to recognize Coursera certificates going forward as well, which is really exciting. So our learners are looking for transformative change. So who are they? Where are they, and where do they want to be? This is really the critical component when we need to look at our learners and developing content for our learners. Most of our learners are looking for flexibility, right? They come to the Coursera platform because it's mobile friendly and it's organized in chunks that are easily consumable. For example, after you put the kids to bed at night, or when you're working out on a treadmill, you can watch a video. But learners in today's very busy world need that flexibility, as well as the price affordability to further their goals, whatever that might be. But it's not just people, right? It's actually businesses as well that are looking to add value for their employees through Coursera. So you might think of a normal person that might be your core demographic learner, but I also encourage you to think about how enterprise or how companies could actually be a learner or a partner in and of itself for your content. So for example, Laurent Reich from L'Oreal has mentioned that he's looking for a way to help the professional development of his employee base, and that this is really crucial for normalizing a culture of improvement, keeping their employees retained and upskilled in a way that's more cost efficient long term, and also just creating a customized pipeline that can really benefit this particular company needs and goals. So I encourage you to think beyond the college student that you might be familiar with teaching on a on-campus experience, and think beyond the walls of the university and consider learners from around the world and also businesses from around the world, because effectively those are your target audience for your content. So now I want to talk about your learner stories. So some of you may have created learner stories when you submitted content for our request for proposals or our RFP process. This might also be an entirely new concept to many of you, which is perfectly fine. So let's think about, who are your learners? This is an exercise that my team, Teaching and Learning, is fundamentally drives, because without the perspective of who our learners are, it's very difficult to build content that's meaningful for them. Now, you might be overwhelmed and think, well, if we have a global audience with all these different people from all the different backgrounds around the world, then how can I design content for everyone, especially if this is at scale? So what we recommend is that you think about a persona, or you come up with a story of a person who represents a larger audience. So we actually recommend that you come up with 2 to 3 learner stories that have names, that have personalities, and have, real concerns, and they have goals on how they want to transform their lives, and use those stories as a metaphor to target these other broader audiences within who might be engaging in your content. So when we think about our learners, we have to think about, what do they do? What is their background? Do they have an advanced degree, or are they just getting started in expanding their educational background? Are they looking for a job promotion or a career change, or are they engaging in your courses because they're interested and they just want to pursue this topic because of their passion? So here's an example of a learner story that is, and it's an example of what not to do, but then we'll go into an example of what is a really great strategy for coming up with a learner story. And the reason being is we want to create these needs that are targeted in a way that are actionable, which we'll get to when we talk about learning outcomes in a moment. So here's Ruth. Ruth has been in her corporate position for 2 years. She's about to start a family, and she's thinking about the world her child is inheriting. She loves her company and wants to contribute to making the world a better place. She wants tools and ideas that will help her be an effective agent for positive change in her company. So this example here, we don't have a clear idea of who Ruth is. We know that Ruth is in some type of corporate position. She just started a family and wants to somehow contribute to making the world a better place, which is a very lofty term, but an ambitious one too. And she needs some type of tool set that can help her become a creative agent of change inside of her company. So this learner story, we don't know if the course she's engaging in is a business company or an environmental design company, or we don't really necessarily know the context of what she's trying to do. And another key factor is we actually need to know, what will Ruth be able to do after she has completed your course or specialization. So here's another example of a learner story that fixes some of the problems with that first learner story. So Aaron is a computer engineer and has many great ideas he'd like to implement, but he doesn't know what he needs to do to bring his idea to market. So in the specialization, he's introduced to the entrepreneurial aspects of engineering and how to bring a prototype to the market. So through this course, or through the specialization, he learns how to target customers, calculate a budget, secure funding through venture capital or other type of investment, and also how to launch this product in a service in a way that actually penetrates the market. So in order to do this, he has a plan. He has a business plan that he's developed as a project through the specialization that he can bring to his organization or to his set of investors in a meaningful way. So the biggest difference with this learner story is that we do still have the background of this person and what they're aspiring to do, but it's much more concrete. And it's also much clearer how Aaron is going to get there. The fact that he can write a business plan, that he knows how to calculate a budget and launch this product or service in a meaningful way, these are all skills that he hadn't had before taking this specialization. So creating actionable ideas within the learner story itself will actually help you to formulate your learning outcomes and your projects as you develop content throughout the production process for Coursera. So again, I encourage you to think about, what is your learner going to do after this course? But before that, where are they now? What is their background? Or what type of skills are they looking to include or to incorporate into their everyday role? And after they gain those skills from your specialization, how will their life be different? And also, I encourage you to think about, what are they going to get excited about? What are they really going to appreciate about your content? Is it the way that the professor demonstrates the content through the video? Is it engaging with the brand of your university? Or is it even just the type of projects that they use, that they develop, have real meaningful portfolio-based outcomes that they can actually use in a job interview or on a resume. So all of these materials are available on the Coursera 101 course, which you are all enrolled in. And there's a section where you can explore these ideas in more formal capacity. So now that we have an idea of our learner story, let's talk about learning outcomes and how can we use our learner stories to ground our perception of what we want the learner to be able to do after the course or after the specialization. So teaching and learning encourages this idea of backwards design. So in a traditional on-campus college experience, generally we start with a syllabus and think about how to build assessments to fit the syllabus. However, when designing content for MOOCs or when creating an online learning environment, we actually have to redefine or approach pedagogy in a different way. So we actually start with who are our learners, what is our target audience that we're trying to reach, and what are those specific learning outcomes that we want them to be able to do? Are we teaching them how to program in Python? Are we teaching them how to write a business plan? Are we teaching them how to become a photographer? But regardless, learning outcomes are the first step. After we come up with that set of learning outcomes, then we can think about the assessments and how to build in supplemental materials such as readings or other type of forms of engagement that learners will actually be doing on the course itself. And that's what ultimately informs your video production. So it might be intuitive to start with video production first and then build out your assessments. But this is actually not something we recommend. We recommend that you define your learning outcomes and then your assessments so that your video actually covers what is built or implemented into the assessments itself. We have seen some problems with some courses where the videos don't necessarily teach the skills that a learner will need to succeed or to complete an assessment. So to prevent this, we encourage you to think about the assessments first and then develop the videos around those core activities. Now, I know many of you are educators and have been for a very long time, but it is worth mentioning that Coursera also comes from an academic root, and we incorporate mastery learning as well as Bloom's taxonomy within our structure of the content on the platform, but also we encourage you all to think about Bloom's taxonomy as well. Now, there's lots of research and articles around Bloom's taxonomy. It's also been revised over the last several years, but what's really effective with Bloom's taxonomy is that by using action verbs, you can create more clear and concise learning outcomes that will help learners actually do something on the platform. So evaluating, synthesizing, and creating are all action words that we encourage you to use in your module descriptions or even your course description page or specialization description page so that we shift gears from passive learning to active learning. We very much believe that action learning, active-based learning is possible in an online environment. But in order to do so, we need to start with creating strong vocabulary in a way that promotes that. So some key verbs that you can think about is when you want a learner to understand something. Understand is a pretty vague word. So how can you use a Bloom taxonomy verb in a way that articulates this in a more concrete way? So rather than have a learner understand something, force or encourage that learner to demonstrate what that understanding is by explaining or illustrating what that concept is in a meaningful way. So this could be an entire workshop in and of itself, but I wanted to bring up Bloom's verbs and Bloom's revised taxonomy because using these verbs can actually help develop your module descriptions and your course description page and your overall learning outcomes as you're developing your content. So we have our learner story, and we have some core ideas on what we want our learners to do. But sometimes it's just so amorphous that it's difficult to think about how are we going to turn this idea into an objective, into a learning outcome. So let's take a very broad topic that's somewhat silly, but hopefully interesting enough and a good example of how this can translate for you. So let's say you want to teach a learner how to juggle, how to throw objects in the air and practice something. So you have this topic, but how are you going to turn that into an objective? Well, a very succinct or academic way of thinking of what juggling is you have 3 round objects under a certain weight, and learners need to continuously toss the objects, keeping one airborne at all times for 30 seconds with no dropped objects. Okay, that seems very concrete in what juggling is, but let's actually take a look at how we're doing this. So when we take this topic of juggling, first we need to think about what is the observable performance? In other words, what is the learner actually doing in this outcome or in this topic? Not only that, but how are we going to perform or measure the conditions of performance for this activity? In other words, what tools or information will they be given, will the learner be given in this situation? And last, how will we know that they have done it, that they have successfully achieved this topic, this learning outcome? So one possibility for this learning outcome is that there could be a peer review on the platform where learners have to submit a video of them juggling the observable performance, which is 3 round objects under 8 ounces, as well as the condition of the performance, and that they have to continuously keep this airborne for 30 seconds without dropping it at once. So somewhat of a vague analogy. So let's take a business example. So let's say we want to teach the internal rate of return to a learner. That's the ultimate objective. So how do we turn that into an outcome? Well, we use those same core those core ideas before, and we need to give it some type of observable performance. So we want a learner to evaluate the attractiveness of an investment. So that is an active Bloom verb, right? We want them to evaluate and analyze a type of investment. And after that, we want them to think about, after this evaluation, to think about the price and what's the expected cash flow and return of investment for this particular activity. And last, how will we know that they've succeeded or that they've performed this? In this example, we want them to calculate the return within 1% of accuracy. So even though this topic of internal rate of return is somewhat vague, we can use these various criteria to turn it into an actionable objective that uses Bloom's verbs in a way that can help facilitate that into action-based learning. So now I want to talk about projects and project-based learning on Coursera. So you may be aware of this particular formula of a specialization. Specializations in the past with Coursera have been around 3 to 4 courses with a final capstone project. And after a learner completes a specialization, they receive a certificate that they can either put in LinkedIn or perhaps get some type of credit at a university or in an enterprise situation. However, what we encourage for content creators on Coursera to think about is how can you add projects and capstones throughout the specialization so that learners are actively putting these skills together in a concrete, succinct way throughout the entire experience of the specialization. So we have a new proposed model where we believe that adding projects or mini projects within each course of a specialization will not only enhance the valuable credential, which is your brand, which is your certificates, but also that we can set up learners for success by creating authentic real-world application experiences. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of this, I want to take a step back and actually think about what is all of this nomenclature and all of these words. So for example, when we think about the skills that we want our learners to be able to do, we want our learners to take those skills and demonstrate those skills through a project. So on Coursera, we have a course, and several courses make up a specialization. Now within each course, we have modules. Modules are sections of content that introduce a core skill or topic. Generally, we map out one module per week. So week 1 is module 1, week 2 is module 2. This isn't always the case. So it's not that you have to have 4 modules of content for every course, but a module should encapsulate a core fundamental skill or outcome that they need to demonstrate in some capacity. So within a module, you have different types of lessons. And to formulate a lesson, you create items. By items, I mean things like quizzes and peer review assessments. By combining quizzes and readings and video into lessons, you can combine multiple lessons into a module to teach that fundamental concept in that section of the course. So this combination of lessons and items are really where the assessment piece comes in. But it's not just a matter of putting a quiz within a lesson and saying that's an assessment, but it's also about helping scaffold and support the learner throughout the experience so that they are set up for success to complete this assessment. So we encourage you to think about the assessments, not just as a quiz or a peer review, but think of how will your learner demonstrate this understanding that was, or this concept that was presented in this module as a project? What will they actively be able to do? So here's an example of 4 modules within a course. And at the end of this particular course, there's a project, a cumulative project that incorporates all of the fundamental concepts that was presented into a final project. So for example, if this is a business course, we could say that this course was specifically focused on writing the business plan. So Aaron, our initial learner from our learner story, Aaron needs to learn how to build his business plan. So in this course, each module goes through each core topic of how to build a business plan and how to write it up. And then by the end of this course, he actually is writing his business plan and submitting it for evaluation. The next course might look at how to do a formal pitch for investment. So it's an entirely different concept, but still relevant to the specialization. Regardless, we need to think about what are the overall learning outcomes at the specialization level, as well as what are the learning outcomes for this particular project in this course. So for each specialization, we have general guidelines. This is definitely flexible and it depends on your content and level of expertise, but basically we encourage each project to be between 5 to 6 hours of learner engagement time. Now, by engagement time, we mean learners who are on the platform watching video, reading materials, submitting quizzes, or writing the materials necessary for a peer review, or writing a programming assignment. All of that type of activity is what we call learner engagement. So for an entire specialization can be made up of 4 to 7 courses. Really depends on the content and what you're trying to do. But for each project, we want learners to spend some meaningful time actively engaging in your content. So going from this passive learning into active learning. Last but not least, I want to give an example of what this actually looks like in a way that might be more concrete. So if I want to become a DJ, right? And I need to, my first course, I need to cover content that goes into the art of production, of music production. So how to record music. The second course in the specialization talks about editing. So it's not just a matter of recording, but it's also about how you snip and cut the production recording in a way that's meaningful. And last, mixing and mastering the music, bringing it all together. All three of these courses, by the end of the specialization, you will have produced a real song. So this is an example of how a project in each course can fully develop into one big project at the end of the specialization. So we have two models of how to think about projects within your specialization. This is totally up to your discretion, and we encourage you, the content experts, to think about what's best for your learners. But basically we encourage that every course has some kind of real-world application or some kind of project that learners are going to build upon throughout that specialization. If each project builds on top of one another, this would become a accumulating project. So for example, if I'm building a mobile application, if I want to take a specialization on how to build a mobile app on an iPhone, each project within the first 3 courses will demonstrate the core foundations on how to build a mobile app. And then the final project will be bringing it all together as that final application that is submitted for review. If the content is more subjective, or it's more separate and it doesn't accumulate into one master product like a mobile app, then you can think about how can each course incorporate a project in a way that's meaningful. So think about back to our learner story with Aaron. Aaron not only had to write a business plan, but he also had to understand how to pitch his idea to investors. He had to think about market penetration and also what the longevity of his company will be. So again, it depends on the type of content that you're creating for Coursera, but effectively we need learners to develop real-world applications that are relevant to their careers or their interests. And this is what ultimately will help them demonstrate their skills, whether it's something they use as a portfolio for a job interview, or even if it's just something that they can tangibly say and have a comic book that they've produced, or a song that they've produced, or a business plan that they've produced. Having a tangible artifact is something that learners will derive meaning from, and that they can also use in other capacities going forward. So we focus on projects because, as I've been saying, they apply skills to real-world problems. And this is really the foundation of Coursera, is that we want learners to be equipped with the skills that they need and to go to wherever they are, whether it's their community or their business or even their home, and how to apply these skills in a real way. It's important that we think about our business learners, but also our learners that are just trying to pursue their careers or their job professionality in a way that will transform their life in a positive direction. So by demonstrating skills, going back to this idea of projects, of artifacts that are tangible, that they can use in an interview, that will help learners be set up for success after they've taken your specialization. And last but not least, this is something that's really at the core experience on Coursera, is that we hope that learners will come back after they've developed a project. So projects help promote this idea of lifelong learning. We're in a day and age where it's very difficult for learners to stay in one career their entire life. But we live in an age where people need to be retrained and they need to relearn or learn new things as they're going through life and pursuing their goals. So having projects is the first step. And as learners begin to reiterate and build upon their projects, it'll be the first step to a long trajectory of learning. So at the end of their specialization, they might have produced a song or a business plan, but hopefully this will be the first step into an entire new skill base that they have not had before. So I actually want to take some time to go to the Q&A session now. And I want to think about, or I want to address any questions that you all have at this present time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and I'm going to go back to the website right here, right now. Give me just a moment. Apologies for this technical thing right here. All right, so I've gotten some questions through the Q&A, and thank you all for submitting your questions for the Q&A. The first question I'd like to address is, the question is, can we have a copy of the slide deck after the presentation, or can we share the recording of the presentation with colleagues? So the answer is yes, we absolutely will share these materials with you. This is materials that we encourage you to share with your colleagues at your institution. We are welcome to the slides as well as the video recording itself. And we will follow up with everyone who's participated in the Q&A after the session is over, as well as after the other sessions are over tomorrow, so that you can distribute those materials internally. The other question I would like to address is, what defines a project? Oh, I just realized I'm not presenting. Apologies. Oh, apologies. I had to make sure that I actually am still being video recorded, which I am. Great. So the other question is, what defines a project? And what are the clear requirements for this? So it's important to think about, what are your learners going to do? So what defines a project should be, identifying the essential questions and challenges that you want your learners to be able to do. So for example, what would define a great project is to have a learner come up with solutions, to implement that solution in a meaningful way, and to get feedback on that solution. So for example, if you're writing a computer programming assignment and you come up with an algorithmic solution to analyzing corporate data, then the criteria of that project should go back to those core learning outcomes that you want your learner to be able to demonstrate. So in this content, is the core experience about writing code? Is it about analyzing big sets of data with code, or applying a model? Or what are they trying to communicate after they've applied that code or written that code to analyze this set of data? So the project itself should be defined by what you want the learner to be able to do after the project is done. What is the solution, or what is the set of skills that they're going to try to do? And last but not least, we need to help set up learners for success by having them be active in this process, by collecting information, by gathering resources that they need to complete this project, whether it's the knowledge to write computer programming, or whether it's writing a business plan or shooting a video to submit for peer review. Regardless, the project should be using these Bloom verbs, these action-oriented verbs, where learners analyze, they synthesize, they create, they evaluate, but effectively the core learning outcome will be demonstrated through that project. All right, so our next question is, how much learner engagement time per module do you recommend to have? In other words, how much time do learners need to engage with assessments per module? So we have a general recommendation of 3 to 5 hours of assessment engagement per module. Now, this is also plus other types of assignments and reading materials. So going back to this idea of learner engagement, it goes beyond just watching video, but it also incorporates the other types of interactivity on the platform itself. So in other words, about 3 to 5 hours per module. And if you're on a module per week basis, then that is between 3 to 5 hours of work per week. Now, this isn't necessarily true across the board. We've seen other types of courses that are more technical or more theoretically oriented, where it just, practically speaking, takes 6 hours in and of itself to write a computer program that you need for that particular module. So our general recommendation is 3 to 5 hours per week per module, but it's okay if it's beyond that too, if it's something more like 6 to 8 hours. Again, we'd rather the content drive the hours of engagement rather than just trying to meet a quota or a number of engagement. The next question we have is, what's the difference between a project within a course and accumulating project at the end of the specialization in terms of the scope and instructional design? Great question. So think about accumulating project. In other words, a project that takes or incorporates all of the concepts within the previous courses and formulates them into one cohesive project. So for example, if I want to, as accumulating project, have a polished professional portfolio website, then the courses throughout that particular specialization, the first course might be a project specifically on HTML. The second course might be more about the stylistic components of a website, so how to implement images and fonts and stylistic design. The third course might go into something like JavaScript or the interactivity portion of the website. Or maybe I need to add a database so that I can collect data or add a shopping cart to my website, whatever it might be. So each course focuses on a core concept, HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and then databases. And then the accumulating project would bring all of these things together so that the learners have to create a brand new website that incorporates all of these fundamental skills they had to demonstrate previously. Now, in a specialization that does not have accumulating project or a capstone or a final project at the end of the specialization, you can think of it as incorporating mini projects throughout each course. They may build on one another, but it's perfectly fine if these projects are stand on their own. So for example, let's say you have a data science specialization and you want to introduce learners with different analytical techniques. So the first course might introduce Excel, and there's a project about Excel. The second course might introduce a topic that is more sophisticated, like using MySQL. The third course might incorporate a programming language like Python or R in order to analyze data. So even though these tool sets are different, each course has a project that specifically teaches the skill on how to analyze data with Excel, how to analyze data with MySQL, and how to analyze data with Python or another programming language like R. So the core learning outcome is that you are setting up the learner for success to analyze data with a variety of tools, but you don't necessarily have to create a final accumulating project at the end of the specialization where they're using Excel, R, and MySQL to analyze one problem. In this context, it might make more sense to set up learners in a way where they can choose which tool to use in their real world scenario in a way that sets them up for success in that situation. So that being said, the instructional design will depend on your content, but it goes back to your learner stories and your learning outcomes. What do you want them to do? And what they end up doing will be driven through those projects. All right, we have another question. If our students will vary in profiles, in other words, it depends on the topic we teach, how can we better engage a not necessarily homogeneous audience as it would be in the classroom? So in other words, we have a global audience. So how do we design our content for a global audience? You might have a learner in the United States, as well as South Africa, as well as the Ukraine, as well as in China. So what do you do to include learners in a meaningful way, to engage them in a meaningful way in this course? So for example, we encourage that you use inclusive language. So what we mean by that is when you're producing video or an assessment, that you use words like you, and that you look at the camera, because even though I'm looking at you, I'm also looking at hundreds of other people or thousands of other people through this one camera. But using this inclusive language makes it feel like you're talking to me, and that can be very powerful. It's also important to use diverse examples and images. So for example, let's say you're talking about a startup company. It would be great to have an example of a startup company, not only in the United States and Silicon Valley, but also an example of a startup company in Sweden or in China or in Australia. Basically, if you can include examples from major audiences or major emerging economies and developing economies, that will help learners at least have a way to connect with the content. If you're just learning about startups in Silicon Valley, that might not be very helpful for someone in Indonesia who wants to develop their own startup company. So we encourage you to use diverse sets of examples and images. And also, you have to be aware of cultural references as well. So for example, using the United States-based measurement system is not going to be very effective. Most of the entire world besides the United States uses the metric system. So when talking about inches, probably not the way to go, or you could say inches and centimeters, right? So even just having that idea of the type of cultural references could be really important. Another interesting aspect to cultural references is that examples may not be relevant in all contexts. So if you use an example of baseball to teach statistics, baseball may not be relevant to a country where there is no baseball or there isn't a team. Maybe it's cricket is actually more applicable in that context than baseball. So you could provide multiple examples of, choose your sport, football, as in soccer, baseball, cricket, and that way the learner can either use a data set or use a metaphor that they think is more culturally appropriate to them. It's also important to think about how to give learners diverse ways of approaching a project. So there is a feature on Coursera called assignment choices. This is actually a way to give learners a choice on what type of assignment they want to engage in. So for example, if I'm analyzing a data set, let's say it's a data science course, the data set could have environmental data, it could have corporate data, and it could also have government data, let's say housing statistics. So let's say we have learners that are both in the public, private, and nonprofit center. How are they going to engage in data analysis? Well, if you give them lesson choices, they can choose to analyze the government-based data, the private sector data, or the other types of data sets that are available to them. So this is another way that learners can tailor their content in a way that's more applicable to them. Last but not least, I want to just mention that since you are reaching a global audience with your learners, it's important to use multiple cognitive pathways. In other words, using this combination of visual, audio, text-based practices, coming up with metaphors in the videos to explain certain things, and also giving learners the opportunity to practice. So we strongly recommend that your learners have practice quizzes or practice programming assignments or reflective questions, discussion prompts. In other words, giving learners the opportunity to reflect on what's being taught is a really effective learning practice that will help set them up for success when they're taking that summative assessment or that assignment for a grade. The last, I already said that the last thing was the last thing, but actually this is the last thing. We also encourage you, as well as the learners, to interact with each other on the forums. So this is a great way that learners can connect with other people in their area of the world in a meaningful way. For example, we've seen learners that have created threads saying, hey, I'm a learner in China or Singapore. How can, if you're around or if you're in this country, let me know, we can talk. We've seen learners take that group interaction to other websites, whether it's Facebook or using other types of group interaction technologies to collaborate. So use the forums, take a look around, make sure that people are or that there are forums in a way that can help facilitate that type of group interaction. So there's a lot of strategies that you can create inclusive language, inclusive audience for your learners when developing content. All right, next question. What are the best practices in terms of engaging students in a course? Great question. Engagement is a key part of the learning experience on Coursera, especially in any type of MOOC or online learning environment. So one of the tools within the content creation itself that we recommend you use is discussion prompts. So discussion prompts are a lesson type. So it's an item type that's just like a quiz or a video lecture or a reading. But basically, these discussion prompts give learners an opportunity to answer or reflect on a question that you provide, and that you can actually see what other people have responded. So it's not quite the same as a forum, because the discussion prompt is a specific topic or idea that is addressed in the lesson or the module in which they're engaging in at that time. And learners can reflect on each other's comments and actually engage with each other through those types of discussions, which is pretty great. The other way that you can engage learners is think about some other creative, non-traditional ways of engaging learners online. So, for example, we had one professor at a university who did a virtual office hours on Google Hangouts, much in a similar way that we're doing today. And basically, he had a designated time with many global time zones saying, hey, I'm going to give office hours at this time. About 200 people showed up out of a 1,000-person course. And what was really great is that this video ended up becoming an FAQ or facts video for the course itself. So even though it was this virtual office hour moment that you wouldn't think would continue after the office hours were done, but that actually became a resource in and of itself in the course, which was pretty exciting. So that's another interesting way to engage learners. We've also seen one professor, for example, Dr. Chuck, who teaches the Python for Everybody course from the University of Michigan. He is our first professor on Coursera who has given a virtual graduation ceremony for his specialization learners. So this isn't necessarily something that I think everyone or even most content creators on Coursera will do, but it was a really interesting and engaging way to make the learners feel special and that the professor cared about them and their completion of the course. So for example, he read through every single name and showed a picture of everyone who had completed the specialization, including those that didn't want to demonstrate their picture or show it because of privacy reasons. So that was a really interesting and engaging way that he incorporated into his course. And on a more practical and sustainable way, lastly, you can engage your learners by basically setting them up with guiding materials throughout the course. So let's say there's a peer review where learners have to review, let's say an entrepreneurial pitch of a business plan. So if I'm practicing a business pitch, how would I know as an amateur or as a non-expert to judge whether it's a good pitch or not? So the peer reviews have rubrics on how the learners actually have to review and grade each other. But we also recommend that you give them some guiding examples on what an excellent entrepreneurial pitch would look like, or give them guiding examples on how to give a great peer review. In other words, how do you promote constructive, not constructive criticism, but constructive feedback? So giving them some examples of even sentences of what I would improve on is this, or I recommend that you did this, or you did this really well, but this could be improved. Even just giving learners some guidance on how to succeed in, for example, a peer review process, that can really help foster engagement. So these are just some examples out of many some of the most engaging courses that we've seen have come from professors who try to do something new, or professors who just try to create really great quality video lectures, not necessarily production-wise, but just their personality comes through on video, and they try to engage the audience in a way that is meaningful to them, as in like they're teaching on an on-campus experience. All right, so we have another question. Do you have any tips for how I can transform an academic course into a career-oriented course? This is a great question, and something that a lot of our partners have struggled with. Typically, most of our partners have taught traditional lecture-based courses for years, if not decades. So how do you translate an academic course into an online learning experience? The first thing is you need to think about, what are the learning outcomes? So you might be able to have a course that you've taught on campus for a while. Now you have to think about, do you want every aspect of that course to be part of the online experience? In other words, what has been historically one academic course on campus could be an entire specialization on Coursera. This allows learners to think about each stage of that process, as well as focusing on the skills that they need to succeed throughout each core concept. And also, when thinking about your learning outcomes, each video or each lesson as well should have some type of concrete outcome or practice-based assessment in a way that learners can demonstrate their understanding. In other words, look at your syllabus that you have traditionally had on your on-campus experience, and look at the pieces where your students are actively doing something, whether it's developing a business model or writing an essay or developing a screenplay, whatever it might be. Think about how you can break that down into high-level learning objectives. In other words, what are they going to be able to do at the end of that course? And then think about how that can be broken down even further into each module. So if I want to write a fantastic business plan, then I not only need to understand what that means to begin with, but also have an example of what an excellent business plan looks like, some tips on how to write a business plan, and then the final project would actually be writing that business plan itself. Now, this might just be 2 weeks of content in your on-campus experience in your course, in your academic course. But on Coursera, it's all about creating content in a way that's modularized, that can be synthesized in a holistic experience, but is also short and sweet and to the point. In other words, going straight to that learning outcome. All right, this is the last question. Some of our materials are theoretical. How do we create real-world projects for something that is based on theory, like economics or math? This is a great question, and it's something that definitely comes up in my domain in technology and data science. So the first thing is, what are you trying to help your learners achieve in a theoretical course? Do you want them to be theoretically trained? In other words, if you're creating a course on operating systems, is it more important that learners have a theoretical understanding of how operating systems work, or do you want them to actually develop their own operating system? In other words, would a final project be, tweaking a Linux kernel, for example? So it comes back to, what do you want the learner to be able to do? It's perfectly okay to have a theoretical foundation to a course, and even having a theory-based course can be applied in a lot of ways. So for example, when we say project, we really mean an authentic assessment, a way in which the learner can problem solve. So if it's a theoretical mathematics, or let's say it's theoretical physics, first, learners have to be introduced to the foundations of theoretical physics, ranging from Einstein to Feynman to Brian Greene, whatever. So they have to have that foundation of knowledge of just what's already been done. And then there has to be some type of authentic assessment or problem solving to theoretical physics. So it might be they have to apply a theory, a model of the universe, and articulate why they think the multiple universe theory is more applicable than the holographic universe theory. So even though this is a very theoretically based idea, it's something that can nevertheless be applied in a project or in a formal assessment. I have to argue and back up with the mathematics and the models of why I think the multi-universe theory is more applicable than the holographic universe. So again, will they be doing something tangible? Well, in a way, they might be writing an essay or uploading a video, giving examples on why they think that's the right model. But it's not necessarily a tangible project.